No. Okay. My name's Kyle, and this is my speech. So at the end of World War II, the United States had defeated the Nazi Party in the East and looked west to defeat the Japanese Imperial Army. To do this, the United States dropped a nuclear bomb, which was justified in my opinion, and it ended the war swiftly and minimized casualties despite the fact that it did cost 200,000 civilian life. And I'll prove this with 3 points. 1, the Japanese had a last man mentality which had to be broken. I'll go into that more later. 2, the loss of life that would have occurred had the bombs not dropped greatly outweighs those lost in the actual bombing. I'm talking about millions compared to hundreds of thousands. And 3rd, there's a lot of common misconceptions about nuclear radiation and how it works, and I'll clear that up at the end. So on to my first point. Since the days of the samurai, the Japanese have been known to have this honor over surrender thing, that death is the only option. There is no other option besides that. And this was proven a lot over coastal battles, such as Okinawa and Iwo Jima. For example, during the first week, Marines would clear out maybe 75% of the occupying Japanese forces and spend 3 weeks clearing out the remaining 25. And this is because the Japanese literally would not give up. They would starve to death. They would do anything they could to fight the last man. And so how this affects the actual war and the bombing is that when you have an entire island of 5 million Japanese soldiers remaining, and they're all willing to fight to the death, and you remember, it's not just the soldiers, it's the civilians too. So you have 5 million soldiers plus maybe like 7 million civilians. That's not a war, that's genocide if you had to kill them all. So how do you beat that? You break their mentality. The nuclear bomb literally was shock and awe. It broke their spirit, and there are a lot of accounts of Japanese who, after they witnessed the bomb, they lost the will to fight because they couldn't imagine that there was such a powerful weapon out there and the United States had control of it. And so this mentality that was broken leads on to my second point about the loss of life. Like I was saying earlier, how the Japanese fight the last man, during the war they had occupied lots of territory. And so if the Allies wanted to ever retake this territory, they would have to defeat all the Japanese within it. And again, this is the end of the war, so supplies are running low, and there are actually accounts of cannibalism happening because, well, rice is running out, Japan's being naval blockaded, there's nothing they could do. They would have had to been starved or killed. And this is just within the territories alone. Again, I mentioned how there's 5 million Japanese imperial troops in the homelands. Had the US invaded, Truman once released an estimate that between 500,000 to 1 million US soldiers would have died. And the ratio for the Japanese loss of life would have been roughly 20-1 within just the military personnel, and maybe double the civilian population would have been lost had they been called upon to fight. And they're actually, so loss of life. So one time there was a group of historians and they interviewed a Japanese colonel and they asked, had we invaded you guys, would you guys have been able to repel it? And he said, no, we would have been able to try. And they asked, try, how would you do that? And he says, we would have kept on fighting until all the Japanese were killed, but we would not have been defeated. Again, this goes back to both points, how it's the last man mentality, and they would have willingly sacrificed everyone they had. So for my final point, it's about radiation. And there are a lot of misconceptions about what nuclear radiation is. Oftentimes we think of like nuclear winter or people turning green or stuff like that. Well, the 2 bombs dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki were, as one historian once put it, they were firecrackers compared to the megaton bombs we have today. Of the 200,000 killed, most of them were from the immediate blast. Only 9% of the surviving population actually had any radiation-induced effects post-war. And again, both those cities are now occupied by modern living Japanese people, so you can actually go there. There are monuments, and it's not dangerous, it's safe. So those bombs weren't, like, they didn't take out the entire land to make it uninhabitable like Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island. So in conclusion, the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima were justified on 3 main points: the breaking mentality of the Japanese war, the saving of millions of lives, both civilian and military personnel, and the fact that the radiation isn't a harmful factor in modern society. Thank you.
I read books on both Okinawa and Iwo Jima. There was after the war, years and years and years after the war, there were still people, still Japanese soldiers that held out.
Yeah.
There was a guy who was trained in the Philippines for 3 years and still thought the war was going on and killing farmers and stuff that he got.
God. Society.
All right, well, the proposition's identified pretty clearly, although it does sound like it's got multiple parts to it and it's almost a value claim. I think you step back from that pretty well. There's a good layout of what the secondary points are going to be. I think you need to spend a little bit more time arguing about why there's a controversy on this, that people have challenged the assumptions or that historians are critical of Truman's decision to go ahead and use the bombs, that there's been revision in history about this issue, and that's why it's a controversy. I think you need to explain that a little bit. The signposting of the secondary claims is pretty clear and easy to follow. I think you do a good job outlining the assumptions. I do think you need to prove those assumptions a little bit more. The explanations that you give are fine, but the evidence that, in fact, the Japanese population was all enamored of this samurai philosophy, even the examples that you talked about where you mentioned the battles where you had this one statistic that said, they took care of 75% of the occupying forces within the first few days, and then they spent weeks clearing out the last 25%. I thought, well, that's a pretty good statistic. Now, where does that come from? I didn't get a source citation on that. And that happens in several places where you present some information, but the information doesn't always sound complete, and it's not given a source citation, so you want to be more consistent on that. I thought you did a really nice job speaking to the audience and explaining the concepts. I'm not sure why the third point is included in the argument. It doesn't really seem to address the main proposition, except that there's probably some assumption about why this is a controversy that this is addressing. It's a rebuttal or reservation argument, but it's not really clear why it is that it's relevant to the main proposition that you're giving. All right, thank you.